In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the lower rear control arm on a Tesla Model S. As to why this is important, well, mine broke while I was driving it, and I heard a few sounds in a parking garage, and I thought that was kind of strange, but didn't know what it was about. And then I want to say it was several drives later, I had some very spooky handling characteristics, turned around, came home, and found that it was completely broken. So let me show you the parts and explain what happened first, and then we'll get into the repair. Okay, this is the rear control arm, rear lower control arm from my Tesla Model S. And this is an original part that is not broken. This one came off of the driver's side of the car. And then this is the link that goes above it. I replaced these as well because it's only one bolt more. I want to mention this is where your rear stabilizer bar would connect if you have one. Not all Model S's have a rear stabilizer bar. So in my case, this is does not connect to anything. Now, here's where my problem came in. Oh, that's different. Yes, indeed. So this part is what you can see this when you look at the rear wheel of the car. It hangs just below the dust shield on the brake rotor. And so you can possibly see it if it's cracked. I did not. I was in a parking garage making a tight turn. This, of course, is the passenger side. And I heard kind of a ping sound, but it sounded like I just drove over like a bottle cap or something very benign. And then a couple days later, I looked under the car. Of course, this is attached to the hub, and they were separated kind of like that. And this was missing. I have no idea where the rest of this went. Not a clue. And if I had not caught it and returned home when I did, very carefully, it's possible that I could have had a more catastrophic issue. I think that this is some kind of bad metallurgy that allowed that to happen. I don't think that is normal. And there's a whole lot of salt and stuff that came out of this hole. Okay, so here's some pictures of the old control arm next to the new control arm. And you can see, well, obviously the new one is shinier. I don't know if that's just because of age and road grime or whether that is because of an actual change in the alloy that's used. I mean, these ones that are original are 8 years old, a little over 8 years old. And the new one is brand new. So it could be that. I don't have any pictures from underneath the car when it was brand new. But you will notice that there are different risers on it from the way it's cast. And you can see those as sort of like those odd flat points all over it. As I understand the casting process, those are places where more material is put into the actual mold to make it. So that would suggest that maybe they've gotten a revised part that shows or that allows the molten metal to flow better into the places where it needs to be strengthened. It's also thicker on the very end where it cracked initially and broke off. And there definitely appear to be some structural changes to this part, and it does have a different number than the original part. It's a revised version. So anyway, that's what they look like side by side. And I think that's important to suggest to you that when you're getting a replacement part, do not get an old one. Make sure you get the current revision of the part. They are reversible. You can put one on, it's the same part either side. And let's get into the repair process. It's really cold here in the garage, so I'm going to be wearing gloves and the whole thing, and there's going to be a little bit less video than I probably would have otherwise taken. I recommend you do this in warm weather because there's a lot of hard things to move around and everything is very, very cold. So I have the car kind of half in the garage so that I can take off the screws necessary to loosen the mid-aero shield, which is the one under the drive unit. I find it safer and a little bit more comforting to do this with the car still on the ground, since you got to go pretty far underneath it. You're going to need 10 millimeter because, of course, everything on this is a metric. Everything on this car is metric. You might want a light. I'm using daylight. Cardboard makes it easier to slide around, and you're going to need to undo a whole bunch of screws under here, a whole bunch of bolts. All right, basically, you got to do some around the diffusers. Both the diffusers have to come off first. There is one that's very, very far up there There's basically two different types of fasteners here, which I'll show you. But the ones that are with the tight thread go straight into the structural drive unit frame, subframe. The ones that are the coarse thread are just into the plastic. So you don't have to worry too much about mixing those up by accident. But this is what we're taking off, is this mid aero shield here, just this bit. But like I said, first you got to get off the diffuser vanes. Okay, here's the diffuser vanes I've taken off. You can see I've patched them in the past when they were splitting using some black tape because the rubber ends tend to come off. Here's the two types of fasteners. So the coarse fasteners just go plastic to plastic, and these fine threaded ones go straight into the subframe for the drive unit. So basically, if I recall correctly, that is the middle one on the long diffuser fin. This is all coarse. And then on the shield itself, there's a line of about, oh gosh, I don't know, it's like 4 or 6 that go across the back edge of it. Those are all these fine ones. Okay, because we're doing a suspension component that has bushings in it, we need to make sure that the ride height, that it's attached with under ride height tension. So I need 2 hands to do that. Hang on. So I am going to kind of ballpark where we should be here. And see that I got kind of going from the middle of the hub. This will make sense later. And I'm looking to the top of the fender, and I'm about 16 inches. So that is important to note. Okay. All right. So I've got the wheel off, and right now it's only on the jack. If you would like to have it on the jack stand, you'll need to take off the aero shield entirely, and then you would rest it on, put the jack stand under the drive unit subframe, which you can see there. It's very clear from underneath when it's off. That's one of the bolts we need to get to, and that is the other one, and then the rest are pretty easy to get access to. First time I did this, I took off the aero shield, and frankly it was a real pain to get it back on. So this time I just took off the 2 vanes, and hopefully that is enough access for me to get proper torque on it. There's the drive unit, by the way. If you do take it all the way off, so the trick I found to getting it back on is there is, right about there, is one bolt in the middle. And there's like a double lip situation going on here. So getting that hole lined up is really hard, and it's far under the car, and the car is very low. And I didn't want to be under the car, obviously. So what I did was I put another floor jack there, like a little scissor one that's included with other cars, and I scissor jacked that mid aero shield up so that it was higher than the lip of the battery pack, because it has to go over that lip, and then it like hooks on the back side. So once I had the jack under the middle where the bolt needed to go, I could give it a pretty good shove from the back side, and that would it would then line up and go over. But it was enough of a pain and arduous that I'm going to try and do this with just loosening the aero shield. So I did the ones under the vanes, and then there's one more on this leading side. I can't see it now. It's about here, I think, on the front side of the aero shield, and hopefully that is enough access. And maybe if you're really clever or have the right combination of extensions, you don't have to do that at all. So anyway, all right, now to take things apart. So here's our new parts. That's the new lower control arm, and I'm going to do the link while it's there because it's only one bolt more. You need 2 sizes. You're going to need a torque wrench. Obviously this is not a torque wrench, but we're taking parts off first. 21 millimeter and 18 millimeter. The big guy goes on here. That's the 21 millimeter, and that is the part that failed on my old one, which I will show you. And this side is not failed. This is a preemptive job on this side. And then there are 2 of these 18s, which are going to hold on the link, and then the back gets 18s, and they're very, very long, and those are the ones that are hard to reach. On the one side there's a brake line. The only way I think you can possibly reach it, which I will try and show you, is with a flex head wrench, ratcheting ideally. And that literally is the only way I could figure out to get into the space to get the front edge bolt, so or nut I should say. But that's it. Everything's 18s except for the front bolt, which is a 21 millimeter. All right, so it's really hard to show you this because I am actually trying to do the repair. So, but that nut way back, right at the tip of where my finger is. This is the upper control arm link here, or upper control link, I should say. And the piece we're working on is this bigger piece down here at the bottom. You can see that that's a separate piece down here. Just kind of make sure that's understood where that's at. So there's the bolt there, which we got to do, or get a wrench on that, and that's how you're actually going to loosen it. But then to hold the nut on this side, there's a brake line there, which I think you can see sneaking down. There is no real access from below. So curses to whatever Tesla engineer came up with this idea, but they clearly assembled this on the drive unit frame and then just drop it or raise it up into the chassis. So you need to get this flex head, and I don't think I can do it one-handed, but if you can see what I'm doing, basically you get it set up at the right angle and drop it down over that nut, and it is super, super tight. When I did the other side, I almost couldn't get the wrench off. It's really ridiculous, but that's how you do it. All right, so I got all the old hardware out. Seems unnecessarily stiff, this connection, but I left that one there because I'm replacing that link as well. And all the old bolts. Now, that is the hardest part, I think, but hopefully I'm not jinxing myself. I kind of got the new control arm loosely in place there, but you can kind of see it down there lurking. But I'm going to go ahead and say that remove the entire aero shield, because fighting around the access is definitely a problem. It's kind of in the way. Now, when I did the first side, I get my light where I want it to go. I put the bolts in that were in those on the inboard side first, and that really limited the movement that I had as far as getting the big bolt that goes here on the front, or on the outside, I should say. So what I've done this time, which I think is probably a smarter move, is I've loosely set those the upper connection. It's loosely in place, but there's no bolt there. And my first bolt I'm going to try and put in is this one, because last time I was a little bit alarmed by some of the scuffing I was getting trying to fit this afterward, because you have to basically lift up this whole bit of the suspension. You can see how loose it is when there's no control arm on it. So you have to lift that up to get this bolt through, and I think it's going to be easier to do when it's the first bolt, and I'm less likely to damage or to scuff up these joints here. So whereas in the back there, they're just bushings, so you really can't hurt them too much. So that's what I'm going to do first, and then we'll loosely tack in the link that goes here, which you can see where it mounts. Basically, it's going to fit in right there, and then I'll do those inner bolts last. Anyway, that's what I recommend. But take the whole aero shield off, because it just really makes it a lot easier to get the movement you need on the wrenches when doing those inner bolts. Yeah, those guys back in there. Okay, so I just have my bolt in and just spun on a little bit so I don't knock it off somehow. As far as the easiest way to get that in, it is tough. It's fairly heavy. But the easiest way, I think, is to take your hand, grab that big meaty caliper, be mindful of the brake line here, but grab that caliper, and that gives you a nice firm handhold to kind of, because you have to pull this out, and with the other hand shove that up, and then also hold it in place and drop the bolt through. So 3 hands are recommended for this procedure, but yeah, grab and hold of that caliper is the best way of manhandling and getting the force where you need it to line that up. All right, so I'll tack in some of these other bolts, put in the joint, and then comes the real struggle of tightening everything up. Okay, so everything is in there sort of little bit past finger tight, but pretty loose still, not torqued down. I want to show you a trick for that captive nut that I was telling you about. So it has to go in, you know, there's only enough access for the tool, basically, right? And in order to get it on there, you have to have it tipped sort of down. And if it falls, it goes deep down in this little tiny hole, and the only way I could get it out was using my little magnet thing. So I discovered that before. So here's what you do to keep it from, like, you know, you get it in position and then it falls off when you're trying to put it around the nut. Get yourself some blue tape, a little blue tape like that, and you're just going to kind of wedge it somewhere in here against these teeth, which is really hard to do one-handed. So do like that, and then you take that nut and you just kind of jam it in there with that tape there, and now that tape sort of like locks it in, right? But when you actually get it on the bolt, which now I got to push pretty hard to get it out because it's kind of jammed on there. Once you actually get it on the bolt, of course the tape falls off, or it goes somewhere in the car that you don't care about and surprise the service tech later. So that's the trick for that. Now comes the sort of sketchy part. As you may recall, we need to have everything tightened down when it is at ride height. And right now it is drooping very low compared to ride height. If I take my yardstick again, and it's supposed to be at 16 to the middle, or at least approximate that, you can see how far off we are. So I'm going to use another jack here and get it up to ride height. Okay, so what I've done is 2 jacks. Some people say you go until it comes off the other jack, but I'm just going to go by the measurement. I have put my blocks of wood here so that there's a gap between that bottom joint. I'm also careful not to hit the dust shield, so you see that? It's resting on the rotor, but that should get everything about at ride height, or at least pretty darn close for garage mechanic. I see I'll put that at 16. Well, it's hard to get it. Jack's in the way, but there you go. So that should be close enough for government work. Now comes the real hard part, is getting the torque wrench out and trying to torque everything, because now that that is compressed up in there, the access for arms and wrenches and everything else just got a lot harder pretty much on those. It's really just those inner 2 bolts. These the ones on the link are easy enough to get to, and the one on the bottom is easy enough to get to, but those ones that are deep inside there, those are going to be a little tougher, especially since I didn't take off the aero shield. So take off the aero shield, kiddies. I tried to take a shortcut. It's a pain in the butt. Well, there you go. There's a little blood as a reminder that even with gloves on, you got to watch the direction you're torquing. So everything's torqued. I removed my second jack. In case I didn't mention it earlier, these parts are interchangeable, left to right. They're the same. You just reverse everything. So here is the torque values. So those inner ones that are hard to get to, but thankfully they're not very tight. 85 pound-feet, 115 newton meters. The link, 130, 95 pound-feet. And the big bolt at the bottom is the tough one. It's 190 newton meters, 140 foot-pounds. So I have to say, that is the one that brought blood from me. And that's why I caution you. As for doing it with the aero shield, actually tightening the bolts up was not so hard as I thought it would be, given the access. So here's the only downside to not taking the shield off, and you can decide if it's worth it, is I can't get my finger there, right here. You see where my finger is? There's a little deflection, a little bend from the wrenches, trying to work those, but mainly for getting them off, frankly. Getting them on is a lot easier because it's all new stuff. So there we go. Everything's shiny, everything's on, and you can see that beefier joint there at the front, which is of course what broke on the first one. And I'm going to put it all back together. Before I put the wheel on, I'm going to do the one, there's one there. You can't really see it, but there's one aero shield bolt right on this corner, that leading corner that I did take off. The rest of them are easily done from, hang on, I'm tangled up in my light. The rest of them are easily done from behind. I guess I can do these with the wheels off. That might be a little easier because that has to tuck up. It tucks up underneath the carpet. Yeah, so you gotta like carpet. Yeah, all right. So I'll leave it to you whether or not you want to, like, how far under the car, how much you want to do while you have the wheel off, because it is a little easier to at least do this outer deflector thing. My usual suggestion, anytime you have a car that gets all the seasons, make sure you're doing your brake checks. Pop the pins, pull out the pads, lubricate everything, make sure nothing's seized up. I just did a quick clean on these in the spring, or no, in the fall. When I put my gray wheels on, I will do a more thorough clean in the spring, but they should be good to go for winter. Even though they look kind of cruddy, that's just typical. And what else should I tell you? I don't know. I think that's pretty much it. So there you go. You can do it without taking the aero shield off. And the part at the time, if I didn't say earlier, is 350 bucks. So I'll get into more of that later on. But now I'm going to put it all back together, put on the aero shields, take it for test drive. Should be good to go. Okay, so let's talk about some of the paperwork things here. This is a repair that should have been covered by Tesla, in my opinion, which I will show you why in a moment. Tesla has a weird policy about it, but we probably want to know how much things cost and where to get some of the details. So let's talk about that. So I showed you this earlier. It has all my torque values on it. This drawing and a lot of other neat things can be found on the Tesla website, where they have full access to the official directions on how to replace things. I want you to note that at the bottom, it does recommend an alignment. Now, it's not necessarily a requirement, but my experience suggests that you probably should do that, as I still have some periodically spooky handling traits. One of the other things I want to make note of is when you find that, you'll see it referring to how to remove the stabilizer bar, and you'll see that there's supposed to be a drop link connected to that control arm. Not all Model S's have a rear stabilizer bar. Pretty much the performance cars do, the best I can tell, going back to the P85, but the S85, the S60, and I think some of the early dual motor cars don't. So you may not need to use either of those directions. As far as pricing, I mentioned it before. Here's an example. Those links that I replaced, they're 53 bucks each. And you'll see on here there's some specialty bolts. Most of them are not very expensive, except for the really long one, which is $17. That bolt is the one, it's these two. And as I mentioned before, the control arms themselves are $350 each. Now, as to why Tesla should cover it, this is a TSB. Let's see if I can get a close look at the number there, right there. It affects 2013 and 2014 cars, and it basically says that these are bad metal, that they may crack and may cause excessive negative camber, which is a nice way of saying your wheel might almost fall off, which is exactly what happened to me. But in typical Tesla fashion, they only cover certain production dates, and they will not cover this repair based on the part number. So even though the part number is exactly the same, they will only replace these for cars built between specific dates. Now, my car was built in May, and I'm guessing they must have had some of these laying around because it's the exact same part number as what this TSB covered. So this is the second time I've been burned by this with Tesla. The same thing happened, the exact same scenario happened with my steering, what do you call it, the intermittent half shaft joint, basically. So they just do this thing where they don't cover replacement based on part number. They do by production date, and their dates are just random selections. So in short, In summary, this is definitely a repair you can do yourself. It is not exceptionally difficult, though there are some tricky parts about it, and it is not cheap to do. I don't recommend getting parts just randomly off the internet or off a salvage car because of the TSB that's involved. You could be getting a part that should have been replaced because of bad metallurgy. So you want to go to the service center or some other official Tesla channel to get the actual current part. I think that's very important. I do recommend that you go get an alignment afterward. I haven't done that yet because I have some schedule problems with, and it's not a major. I'll say in my car, it didn't go very far with the broken control arm. So if it's out, it should be very, very slight. But I have noticed that there's some crosswind shimmying that I don't think is normal, like when a truck passes. And every now and then I get a little bit of a spooky vibe in corners. So I'm guessing that the extra stress when it was broken, even just moving it in the driveway, because of the weight of the car, it may have caused something to be slightly out, even though I don't see it in the tires yet. And I've put a lot of miles on the car actually since I've done this. So I'm just going to say that you probably should have that done. And I don't know that that's necessarily a Tesla specific thing to do. You can go to most other competent places will be able to give you those alignment figures. You're really looking at the rear toe, which might be affected. Anyway, so that's it. I hope this was somewhat helpful to you, and I hope that Tesla does come around. I will be filing a National Highway Traffic Safety Administration report on the failed part because I don't think that it should have failed, quite frankly. And we'll see what happens. Maybe someday there'll be some kind of recompense for it. I don't really think so, but you never know. Thanks for watching, and again, hope this helps you, and stay safe out there.